This is the Math Map Book Club, where ordinary parents encourage one another to develop an extraordinary appreciation of math. We love what we know and struggle over the unfamiliar. Through weekly conversation and exploration among friends, we can begin to enjoy ideas that seem difficult. Join our book club as we discover how math helps us to know God and to make Him known. Hi, I'm Lee Bortons, and it's Wednesday, March 6th, 2024. Welcome to the Math Map Book Club, where Kirsty Gilpin and I discuss 2 lessons each week from our soon-to-be-released math curriculum for families with students in classical conversations. And I'd like you all to know that, unlike last summer where we took a break from the Math Map, we'll be giving you more details, but Kirsty and I plan to be here every Wednesday at 1 p.m. throughout the summer to discuss math as more and more families get the curriculum in their hands. So we look forward to their questions and yours. Okay, Kirsty, what are we up to today?
Well, we are today looking at lessons 17 and 18, which remarkably is going to close out our 2D unit here, our second dimension. So you can see we're trucking through the year, going two at a time. It kind of feels like those 3-point shots in a basketball game, right? When you're like, oh, my team's way up ahead, and then the other team scores a 3-point shot, and it just seems to like totally take away the lead. So going 2 weeks at a time, I feel like we're zooming through this. But it's been fun to look at these ideas and see that progression. Are there any lingering questions to ask before we jump into lesson 17?
I had one notice, and it's been a question I've had. I feel like this week is when, well, I'm working through the complex, so I should probably say that first, but I seen a little calculator symbol. Is that when you guys would like us to use calculators and not? And then the bigger question is, do you have a recommendation about little children? Are you maybe going to have little children start using calculators much younger just so they can explore functions? Or is that something that is still strongly encouraged to wait until like algebra, if that makes sense?
You want me to answer, Kirsty, or?
Sure.
Sure. Yeah. So, through the quotients, they won't be having the calculator symbol nor need a calculator. It'll be kept much simpler than that. But once we get into the reals, complex, and monomials, there are occasions, especially in the trigonometry problems, where you just are going to need a calculator. And so we have a symbol to help parents maybe control what's going on. When there's a calculator, use it. But if there's not one, you should be doing it by hand.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Deanna, just keep in mind that what we talked about last week too was that idea of using exactness, right? So if we're talking about pi, leaving answers in terms of pi, or leaving answers in terms of the square root of 2, and so that those onerous calculations that we may think we need to do, we're not going to do because we're looking for that exact answer. So that
something else that relates to that, though I don't know we've talked about, Kirsty, is for instance, let's say the answer of a problem is 1 1/10, and you might be wondering, well, do I write it as 1.1 or do I write it as 1 1/10 as a fraction? And in general, throughout the curriculum, we tell you and this is common throughout math, if the problem is given in decimal, you end it in decimal, so unless you're told otherwise.
Okay, any other questions that are lingering that you guys would like to discuss before we? So I just thought I would share something that actually came up in a conversation I had with somebody this week. And it was an offhand conversation. It wasn't necessarily intended this way, but it came across encouraging, that they were talking about their child who's in challenge A, and we were talking about ownership and individual work, and this parent said, yeah, my kid, they're amazing in Latin and writing. They're going off and they're really taking care of themselves and owning their education. But math just feels like, they're just not. They just need more time than ever. And we kind of chuckled, and we're like, well, and there you go. That's why we need the math map, because everything else has been designed for your classical education, but you're missing a classical math curriculum that's going to help guide your students to teach themselves. And so um, I just thought I'd share that because it was an encouragement to those of us in the conversation to realize that the math map really is meeting a need. All right. As we look at lesson 17, and we're going to be taking a look at intersecting shapes. Let's go ahead and just take a minute and think about what's familiar and unfamiliar on this page. And as you're doing that, think too about from your own memoria, what is familiar, right? What do you know just because we're all adults and we've had some level of math education in the past? So what's familiar from your own memoria? And then I'd like you to also think about what's familiar from what you've seen previously in the math map, right? So what things are familiar now from the math map and what things are unfamiliar.
The ants are back. I love the ants.
The friendly ant that helps us with math is definitely familiar from the math map because my experience with ants outside of the math map has been less friendly.
A thing that I had to kind of let the concrete harden in my brain was that in area, it's going to be squared. And that mattered when I started multiplying other units. And I sometimes forgot to square those units if I multiplied a meter by a meter, not necessarily thinking in terms of perimeter, but in other places. And so recognizing that squared is area was a good thing for me.
This lesson, the polygons. So that will be familiar.
Well, I've been working with Kirsty for a long time now, and I still have to look up on the glossary every single time inscribed versus circumscribed because either answer seems to apply until you know which of the two shapes you're looking at. So we tried to give a clue with inscribe by making the letter bigger to say it's the shape that's in the circle.
I can never if it's the circle that's in when you inscribe or if it's the other shape that's in. So I have to look it up too.
That's a great
like
point,
that.
right? Go ahead, Jill.
I was just gonna say, I really like that that the directions are specific because it says inscribed polygon, not just inscribed shape. Because for a child, that shape could be the triangle, the square, or the circle. It could be any, so there's really a lot of clues that are added in. And I was a person growing up who did not read directions. So this has helped me read directions.
Very good.
Really.
That's great, Jill. That emphasis on language again, right? We keep talking about the emphasis on language throughout the math map. And so as we look at that phrase inscribed polygon, right, we see that inscribed is our past participle that is being used, right? We're all pulling from our essentials grammar now and our foundations grammar, right? It's a past participle that ends in ed and it's being used as an adjective. So then we want to think, what is it describing? Well, it's describing the polygon. So it is the polygon that must be inscribed. If I had written inscribed circle, now it's the circle that's being inscribed, right? So using our language skills there can help us to decode this. And that's a really great example of what we do with our kids, right? When we're looking at these things, sometimes we're so tempted to skip over. Having that conversation, now we're going and we're taking our foundations memory work, what we've learned in essentials, what we're doing in math, we're integrating all of these ideas together. We may even be pulling in our Latin, right? Because in means in, but circum means around, right? So we can pull our Latin in and notice just on these two words, how we could have this great conversation that integrates our English grammar, our Latin, our math. We could extend it and talk about what circumnavigation means, right? And now we're going to be talking about our geography, and we could then talk about history and Magellan, right? So notice how quickly our math can integrate all kinds of strands into what we're talking about.
That's beautiful. And you forgot, like when you said,
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Jana.
I was just going to say that scribed means written, right? So really inscribed means written inside, right?
I was just going to say, we just had a conversation about, a parent who was worried about
We lost Babs. I'm sure she'll come back. All right. So, Jill, how does it help you to remember perimeter and area by knowing about the ant walking or the ant swimming? So here.
Well, the edge or the inside would be the simple answer for a younger child, that adding up all your edges. And really, you could do that, like if we started even saying, clean the perimeter of your room. To our children, clean the area in the middle, the floor area. I think that if other people are like me, when I hear words, I start using them more in other places. So it's not that I'm trying to get my kids to learn perimeter. It's that as I learned perimeter in foundations or other places, I start using it in other areas of my life. So I'm integrating it from what I've learned. So that would help me with my child. The perimeter would be walking around the edge. You could do it in action with young children, and then obviously older children would be calculating or the perimeter of their room where they stuff all their stuff.
All right. So Jill, I'm picking on you because you brought this up earlier. So as you look at that, if I think about a line, right? So my unit, could I use an inch to cover my area, or would I use an inch to line my perimeter?
Inches would line the perimeter, and like meter is in it. So the meter is a measurement too. So you would use meters maybe to go around something. I don't know,
So
Perry.
what kind of a shape would I need to cover where he's swimming? What kind of shape would cover that?
Well, do you mean like 2D or do you mean
Sure. Well, thinking about like, so I could use my inches or my meters, right? Something that's straight, and I could lie that around my perimeter. Would I use that same shape to cover up my area?
No, you'd want a closed shape so your water stays in. So yeah, but it could be any shape. You could have all kinds of different shapes that require more complicated calculations to get your area.
And now going back to what you said though, what could I break that up into? What kind,
Smaller shapes and more familiar shapes.
which could include our squares, right?
Yes,
And
I'm
so
sorry.
now,
Getting there.
okay, Jill. And so now I get why we need square units, right? Because I need
Yes.
squares to cover up where he's swimming, right?
Right.
So,
And there was a super helpful chart in Silas and I looked at the other day, and I think it's maybe the matrices, but it has, if you're using 0 dimensions, so let's say inch is our unit. 0 dimensions it's inch to the 0. Well, anything to the 0 is 1, right? If you're using 1 dimension, you have inch to the, I shouldn't say it this way, not to the first power. How would I say it? The first power of the inch. So you wouldn't have a exponent. If you're using 2 dimensions, you're going to have inches with a little 2 above it, which is squared. And if 3 dimensions, that blew my mind.
that's great,
simple.
Dana. Thanks for sharing that.
I think making those discoveries, like you were just saying, Jana, so many times we can tell our kids, okay, this, and this, but when they find it in their own conversation, it's so much more exciting. And instead of giving them all the tricks, letting them discover the tricks, and then they won't lose it.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and move us on to page 2. Is there an unfamiliar word on this page? There may be more than one unfamiliar word, but can find an unfamiliar word or two on this page.
For a natural student, I think coinciding and
Good.
inconsistent might be a fancy word for them.
I like that. I like the
Parabola.
fancy word.
I got it from Fancy Nancy.
Parabola is unfamiliar.
Okay. So there's a lot of big words on this page. Let's go ahead and look at the top where it says these shapes are inconsistent, and then look to the right. And what do we see? What are some things that may be true or not true shapes?
Yeah, so
I'm
I would have
thinking
said that
about-
somehow they run parallel to each other, but you're telling me they're inconsistent. So I'm trying to figure out how I link those two words. But that's as a grown-up. Yeah. I'm thinking about oils when we do fine art. So we have straight line, curved line, and a circle.
I
So
like that.
those are not consistent. Meaning different from one another. Yeah.
So could do two inconsistent shapes need to be the same, or could it be a line here and a circle here that never touch, and those are also inconsistent?
So Jill just said something, right? She said, what does it mean for something to be inconsistent? And she said, do they have to be the same and not touch, or can they be different touch? And so she's pointing out that one of the things that you notice here is that there's no touching, right? Whether they're the same shape or different shapes, nothing is touching, right? It's kind of like your kids in the back seat when you're like, don't touch each other, right? And so we're told that they're all inconsistent. And the one thing that is true about all of them is that none of them touch. And so, Jill, you're right. They don't have to be the same. I could have two lines that don't touch. I could have a circle and a line. If they don't touch, that's when we say that they're inconsistent because there's nothing in common between them. Right. So with our kids, they may not ever get to that definition. But that's a great conversation to have, right? What do you think makes these things inconsistent? And then you might talk about what makes things consistent, right? If things are consistent, what does that mean? And so what does it mean if they're not, right? Not even just in math, mathematically. And so there's big words on the page. Do we expect first graders to necessarily know what inconsistent means? No, right? Sometimes it's enough just to be able to see the word and say inconsistent, right? Just to become familiar with the word, right? First step of grammar, we're putting the word in our brain, and its definition may be someplace else in our brain, and that dialectic moment comes when we connect the two together, right? And right, our process may be different in our brains. For some of us, just being familiar with the word might be enough, right? Learning how to pronounce the word, learning what the letters are in the word, that the word itself might be enough. And then we attach a meaning to it later on. I think my mom still likes to laugh about when I read the Anne of Green Gables books. I had never heard the word asylum. I only read the word asylum. And so I was talking to my parents about these books, and I kept talking about the asylum, right? And my mom's like, what are you talking about? And eventually she figured out that this girl who was a great reader and could pick up the context didn't know how to pronounce the word, right? And
Yeah.
so it's this, so there's the same thing, that just reading the word, hearing the word gets us familiar with it. And then later on, we might attach that meaning. So I just wanted to point that out when we talk about things being inconsistent, right? Now we may be helped. Jill, were you helped by the following sentence below that?
Yes, but in my mind, I would have still seen those images being the same next to each other, and I might have still had that question. but seeing that sentence would have helped me because the shapes did not have an adjective saying similar shapes that never touch each other.
Excellent. All right, let's go ahead and look at page 3. And we are told which is about 2 equations with 2 unknowns. And so I wanted to take a minute and look at that middle box here because it says 2 equations with 2 unknowns. And while there may be what we see as multiple equations, those of you who maybe remember solving simultaneous equations from high school or college, does it look like that's what we're doing here? Or does it may not, right? Because it may not to a just copying, right? Are they seeing that they're really doing something with 2 equations and then 2 unknowns, or are they just copying this? So those bars, I just wanted to point out that when you look at those bars, so where it says 2 equations with 2 unknowns, or underneath that variable elimination, right? We're certainly not eliminating any variables there. So where we have those bars, they are pointing towards what that student is moving towards. So it may not always be that your natural student is here actually doing variable elimination or solving 2 equations with 2 unknowns. But the skills that they're practicing here are building towards what those bars indicate, right? So your older students are going to be able to solve equations by eliminating a variable, or they're going to simultaneously solve 2 equations with 2 unknowns. I just wanted to point that out, that those bars sometimes may feel disconnected from what the younger students are doing, but it's a cue there to how those sections are building up and match to what older students are doing. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Great. I'm going to go ahead and look at page 4 now. And this is talking about now the coordinate plane. So a lot of what we've been doing so far, we really haven't looked always at the coordinate plane. Now we're specifically looking at some things happening in the coordinate plane. So we've got some graphs here, and we're told to trace in color, but our bar says simultaneous inequalities. So I just wanted to challenge you for a moment to think through what color is representing greater than, what color might be representing less than, and what color might somehow represent both. And what do you think that means?
So the yellow would be greater than, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And then the green would be both. So then is that purple would be less than?
Excellent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you can see all they're doing is copying and coloring in this. Eventually, in some ways, this is almost nonsense because you need to know which equation is less than and which equation is greater than to be sure of how you're coloring. And so that's why we're just having them copy from left to right to get used to seeing this idea of inequalities intersecting with one another. It is like the Venn diagram Devon just said.
It does a little bit. It just makes me think that there's so many ideas, though, that we have been conditioned to think are reserved for those higher math levels, right? And those smarter students and those advanced kids that are doing these harder things. But I love the fact that you all looked at that and said, well, even without me being told anything, I could see that the yellow is greater than, and the bluish purple is less than, and well, green is in between. It must be somehow both, right? But instinctively, we have an understanding, a mathematical understanding. And what the math map is attempting to do is help you to build the mathematical language to communicate those ideas, right? So we are all mathematical, right? We all can think mathematically. We just don't always have the language. And so this is a great example of where we have that mathematical concept. We can think through it, but the math map is going to help give you the language, as Lee just said, right? It feels like nonsense to a mathematician because they want you to say which equation is which and which one's less than or greater than and which line and what's the equation. But the math map hopefully is going to give you that language in order to be able to communicate that idea. All right. Let's pause there for a minute and just give you an opportunity to ask any questions that are lingering before we move on to 18, or any questions you have about the release of the math map over the next few years.
I think it's a rainy day everywhere. It's raining here. Whenever there's low pressure, I'm not as interesting. So no one has questions. Or it's because we know it all, Kirsty. You've done such a good job for the last year and a half.
Maybe. I did want to just, before a lot of you got on, we were talking with Donna, and I know that there are other product sales specialists that are on the call today. And she was just talking about the event that she's able to offer to families in her area called Experience the Math Map, that is designed to give people an opportunity to be hands-on with the curriculum before they can buy it. So if you have not yet seen the curriculum, I just wanted to encourage you to reach out to your PSSs. If you don't know who they are, hopefully you do, but if you don't, you can ask your director or your sales or SR or your AR and get that information and see what events they may be hosting close to you so that you can be hands-on. You'll also be able to see the materials at practicum, again with your PSSs, but you don't have to wait because they are eager to share with you. So certainly encourage you to find out who is local to you and jump in one of their events. And like I said, I know we have several PSSs that have been on our calls with us here and are contributing so much to the conversation. So I really appreciate them and the work that they're doing. So.
And something, if you've been to the Experiencing the Math or even these math map book clubs, please, please go to the practicum. You may really have a good grasp of what's going on, but I can promise you there's hundreds of people that do not. And we really could use your input at the practicums this summer because this is a big change. So I just want to thank you in advance for anything you can do to help in that way.
I have a question. So let's say my son is 8. And so right now we're working through the naturals, right? Mm-hmm. And next year the decimals will be out. So we should work through that. Is that correct?
Well,
it looks like that. Or integers. Oh, yeah. Okay. So the integers will be online. Is that right? From this,
yeah.
From this.
The other way. The integers will be printed. The starred ones will be online.
I see. Okay. So that will be, okay, good. But
you can see what we're trying to do is in 2025,
right.
We're trying to have all the lower grades available. It's just a big expense and training effort to get them all printed and shipped.
Right.
So we're doing it in half of them, and then the other half will come the next year.
That's great. So then for clarification, I guess the age 9 is at fractions then. So he will be 9 in August. So if we're working through the naturals now, we could kind of jump to the fractions, or should we just stay along the path and just get there when we get there?
No, we are recommending that this next year, that whatever age your student is, that you would choose that age or younger for what's available. So if you have a 9-year-old, you could certainly choose to do the fractions next. If you have an 8-year-old in August, then we would recommend stick with the naturals. Then the following year, you'll be on track. So when he's 10, you can do the rationals. When he's 11, do the reals, and then he'll be lined up for complex and challenge A.
The other thing is we know that you all have multiple children, and sometimes that decision until they're all printed and will be one level that works for both of them. Right, so there's flexibility and there's trust, but there is a plan that by the time you hit challenge A, we want the majority of the children to be comfortable in complex. And of course, people that are new to CC and haven't been in the math map, they may be in challenge A doing complex, but still using one of the narrower domains at home. So there's a lot of flexibility.
Great, thank you. Because as an SR, sometimes these kinds of questions come.
Mhm.
And so I want to be able to help direct the families.
All right. Let's go ahead and move on to lesson 18. And lesson 18 is about transformations of shapes. And so again, let's go ahead and take a minute and look for things that are familiar and unfamiliar on this page.
I think the words in parentheses are familiar to me, but the words above them are not familiar.
And I would say I actually recognize the words above them. I just don't maybe know what they mean in a math context. Would you say that's true? Maybe.
I remember those words being the week of geometry I actually enjoyed.
Well, great. Well, this is a lesson to look forward to then.
This is a
I
lesson
don't know.
my family started yesterday, and my kids got really excited because they thought this isn't really math, this is an art lesson.
Rachel, I saw your Instagram post. That was beautiful. So thank you for sharing. I think that comment too points out something that Lee really emphasized in the development, and we've talked about it before, that some weeks there's a lot of wrestling, and lesson 17 might feel like one of those weeks where there's a bit of wrestling, maybe not with our younger students, but as they get older, they're starting to solve simultaneous equations. They're combining areas. So we're pulling on all of our area and perimeter formulas and looking at differences in shapes. So there's a lot of computation in that week. There's also a lot of some sort of algebraic manipulation that they're building towards in that week. So it's a week where there's going to be some wrestling. And there's certainly room for wrestling in lesson 18 too, but built into 18 is that sense of sort of there's some art in there when we talk about symmetry and things like that. So building in these places of rest as we go through throughout the curriculum. I think that was really a great thing that Lee has emphasized over the course of the development here. So
Thanks, Christy. We've also put in dance steps in this lesson, so you can follow the feet and whether they're moving, flipping, spinning, or growing.
yeah, because those kinesthetic learners, they need just as much time as visual and auditory learners. So here's a question that you could ask with your littles or your bigs if you want to be having some conversation about what's on the page. Which of those words in that top left box, which of those words, right, if they're all transformations, which ones end up looking the same after they've been transformed in terms of the shape itself is the same? It might be in a different place or a different orientation, but the shape itself is the same.
All of them except the dilation, right? Or well, did you say the shape? You said the shape.
The shape, yep.
They're all the shapes
Right.
the same in all of them. Yeah.
Right. And so which one does how something looks?
Your
The
voice.
flip reverses it. The spin puts it at a different angle, and the grows it. Like it makes it bigger.
Great. So we see that our translation, reflection, and rotation, they may change its orientation. They may change where it is, but it keeps the same. But that dilation is the only one that may actually change how it looks, right? And so we see that it's growing there in that case. I enjoy the exercise on the bottom because we see how we can take one shape, right, and do all of these different transformations to it and follow that along. It's a fun exercise there. And I think maybe, Rachel, that's one of the things that helps it to feel more like an art lesson than a math lesson. And that just goes back to what we were talking about earlier too, right? That we have math brains, even though we don't always have the math language. How many of you think that moving, flipping, spinning, and growing is mathematical? Or how many of you thought that before today? Right. Somehow, because it feels accessible, we may think, oh, well, that's an easy idea. Well, that's not really math, but it is. Like, this is real math and it's meaningful math. And so I just want to encourage you, right, that we all have math brains, that we all think we can all accessible, these ideas are accessible to us once we have the grammar. And so again, just the importance of gaining that math language ability to help us out there.
I think you could also think in terms of physics, as because a lot of us, I mean, I have only challenge level students. A lot of these concepts, we don't think about physics and math, or, we just think, oh, that's another thing I'm learning. But that integration is so important, even at this level, learning these types of concepts, that when they get to the older levels, they start to put those connections together too.
That's great. So, Lee, I don't know. I'm going to ask you this here because so I might forget tomorrow. All of the page tops in lesson 18, that top box says properties of shapes, transformations. And I wasn't sure if that was accurate because usually the bars are different. So I just thought I would mention that to you to look
I'll
at.
just double check. I think that they say what they actually are, that we corrected that, but I'll double check. And then another thing that's on this page is those airplanes aren't lined up right. And then we actually changed the F flipped problem to make it more understandable. That was kind of nebulous. So we continue to clean these things up. So thanks, Kirsty, for asking.
So as you guys look at that page, here is a question for you, right? What's another name for a flips? And it is, the other name is on here. It was on our previous page. So when we think about the F flipping, what's another word for flip? What might be the more mathematical word?
Reflect.
Reflect. Excellent. Give Jana a gold star for today. And so what are those dashed lines?
The line we are reflecting across.
The line of symmetry.
Yes, when we look at the whole system, it becomes the line of symmetry. Great. Make sure I'm saying this correctly. So all of our transformations require something external, even if it's drawn internally, but they all require something outside of the shape in order to complete the transformation. If I'm going to reflect something, I need to know what I'm reflecting it. If I'm rotating something, I need to know what I'm rotating it around. If I'm translating it, I need to know in what direction and how far I need to translate it. If I'm growing or shrinking something, I need to know how much I'm growing or how much I'm shrinking it. And I love the idea that points out to me, right? If shapes all need something external in order for them to be formed, am I personally capable of my own transformation?
Mm-hmm.
There's your spiritual question for today, right?
Good.
Right. I cannot transform myself. There needs to be something external to me that's going to create my transformation. And we could think about that as the Holy Spirit is transforming us, we could think about that as God saying, in order to change us, right? He sometimes puts obstacles and challenges and things in our way that he's using to guide us and change us, right? None of us likes to suffer, but yet we hear that we grow closest to God in suffering, right? And that's where he changes us the most. So there's your, when we talk about math and how it's helping us to know God, right? I just every so often think it's a good to just stop and go, oh, there's a spiritual lesson for us in this mathematics. That's what I'm sharing with you today. Let's go ahead and look at page 3. And that's another name for spin.
Rotate.
Rotate. Great. If you have a dancer in your family, they will tell you that they never spin, that they always turn. If you're a dancer, you don't spin, you turn. I've been in trouble for that before. And there's another example, right? Are the butterflies spinning around themselves? Right. There's some other point when that we can see them moving. They're moving around that origin, around that center. So the idea of things rotating might feel familiar. And let's look at the bottom of that page. And these things aren't necessarily rotating, right? Because there's different things that are going on here. They're moving up and right. So that's really a translation. But how familiar does that feel to you? The bottom of the page.
Some more than others. Like the ellipse would be a little more relatable. Those sine waves are still like you have to think a little bit, but you can get there. It's just not the same as a closed shape.
So Jill, because you've been through this a few times, by this point in our lessons, have we seen all of those shapes before?
Yes, many times. So we're seeing them in a new place, doing a new thing, just like you might have used a whisk and now you're going to use it to do something new.
Excellent. Yeah. So one of the things that Lee is, I think one of the things she's really emphasized throughout the whole curriculum is identifying, just like we did with 112 sentences, right? And we said, look, here's all of these sentences. Know these sentences well, and you can know them well by breaking them down and seeing their parts. And so Lee has taken that same approach to essentials and applying that to math. Like, what are the essential things that we can then put together and we've identified this list of functions, this narrow list of all the functions, and then the relation sections, such as the ellipse, and we look at them over and over and over again throughout the year. So we have a couple of lessons that are just about straight lines. Then we have a lesson about curved lines. Then we have a lesson about polygons, right? So now we're putting straight lines together. Then we're looking at circles and ellipses in detail. Then we look at the trigonometric functions. Then we look at them again in lesson 17, especially with our older students, when we talk about how they might intersect. Them again in lesson 18 to see how things could be transformed. We're going to see again in lessons 25 and 26 when we talk about derivatives and integrals. We're going to see them again at the end when we're looking at lesson 30 and we're talking about the summary of ideas. So we're taking these ideas and we're examining them over and over and over again, right? And some students are going to master them by the end. They're going to be like, I know this so well. But everybody that works through the math map is going to at least be familiar, right? Jill, a few years ago, would you have sat down and called that the sine wave or the ellipse as easily?
The ellipse, yes. The sine wave, no. I would not have known. See, that's where too, one of the questions that a lot of parents have asked me, they have seen the map, maybe because they were coming into Challenge A or because it's out there now, and they'll say, so we're going to do addition on this week, but we're never going to do it again. No, that's not the case. We're still adding things in week 18. So what you were saying about having seen this again and again, I think one of the things that people have wondered if the math map will provide is that building and that continual use of what we've learned. And I would say after this many years of having done it with 100% confidence, yes, 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 you do see it. It does build, and over the period of a year and now 2 or 3 years, it begins to take, just like it takes in essentials. It takes a few years to really have that aha moment about what this particular term that maybe you didn't get is, but it does. So yes, seeing this again and again and seeing that sine wave, I would not have recognized before, like 5 years ago, I would not have known. I would have called it, I don't know, people wiggling a jump rope in the air, but I would not have known what it was. And it feels really good to, even though maybe I can't do all the calculations on a sine wave, I am now at least able to point to it and recognize it and know a few things about it. So it's very exciting.
Thanks, Jill. It's been such a privilege to work with the pilot tutors, and I to them because so many of them have worked with our less than refined materials, and they have struggled through and worked with us to refine it. But to see how our conversations among those pilot tutors have evolved, just that to me is so exciting. And I don't want to say any of you weren't mathematical to begin with, but in the confidence that many of you have now compared to when we started, that now you guys just drop math lingo everywhere you're going. And I'm just excited to see other families experience that also after the next few years. All right, let's look at page 4. And this is a great fun page because it's looking at symmetry. But let's first talk about the top left corner because it's what we've been talking about. And this one says that the bug grew or shrank. And so depending on which one is our initial bug, I guess we could think it was either one. It's not necessarily clear which one.
It has arrows.
Oh, the arrows. You're right. Sorry, I missed the arrows. There we go. Attentiveness.
Okay, well, I'll make it clearer somehow.
No,
That's why we do these.
now it was that was me. That was my error. I was not
missed
being
them the
attentive.
first time too, Kirsty.
So
I missed,
that was my
I missed
attentiveness.
I missed
So
them, but my kids said it was obvious.
Well, good. Yeah, see, it is. We just rush to conclusions and we miss things. So what's another word for grow or shrink?
Dilate.
Dilation.
Dilate. I love it. Somebody had our math term. We may have other things, but yes, that is a dilation. So what part, when we're talking about this with our kids, what part of our faces dilate?
Our irises.
Yes.
I
Right.
was gonna say-
Our eyes. We think about our eyes, and all kids like to sit there with a flashlight, right? Make their pupils go smaller and get bigger. Right?
Jill, what's so funny?
I was thinking our kids' mouths and mine. They open and they close.
Well, there's that too. I was thinking of going to the eye doctor where they dilate your pupils, but hey, that's
Well,
yes.
that's much more accurate and scientific and like, normal.
I was just offering that because I think that may help kids to remember that dilation can get big, but dilation can also be getting smaller, right? That we can go both ways with our dilation.
In medical speak, you would say dilation is where they're getting bigger and constriction is where they're getting smaller. But we just dilate in a negative direction, I guess, in math.
In a fractional direction.
A fraction, thank you. Fractional direction.
Yeah.
That makes
But constriction, no, Kirsty, do we need that for the glossary?
Well, we could put it in there, but I think it's going to be one of those things where, right? So medically, we're talking about two different processes.
Yeah.
But in math, there's just one. It's just dilation. And it's similar to the idea that in physics, we have a difference between rotation and revolution, but in math, it's the same. So there are times where math has this really specific idea that this word, is very specific, or, we don't oftentimes have two words, but here's a case where, right, sometimes that rule doesn't apply and we may have other things. So dilation is a general term in math, and rotation and revolution are the same in math. So just putting those ideas out there. Is there anything else on this page that you would like to talk about? Best full page or not?
There's not a lot to do on the page. It's just more of, can you look at it well?
I'm really interested in theta equals 180 degrees and theta equals 120 degrees down there. I don't really know what to say about them.
Because we don't
They seem
explain it.
unfamiliar to me.
Yeah. And we don't explain it. So unless you have the intuition that halfway around is 180 and a third of the way around is 120, you wouldn't get anything out of that.
Wouldn't a third be 60?
Of a circle?
I'm sorry, you're right, of a whole circle. Yes.
Yeah. I was willing to be wrong, Jana.
Hardly ever.
I see. It's the 1 and the 2, and so it's okay. I get it now. I was looking at the whole image and trying to figure out that, but it's a part. It's a one part of the image, or two parts, or three parts of the image. Got it.
So without knowing what theta really means, can we look at this as, oh, on the left side it's 180, on the right side is 120. So theta can then be degrees of change or degrees of rotation.
That's exactly, yeah. Degrees of rotation is perfect because that's how many degrees I would rotate it to make it look like itself.
So theta
yeah.
is a variable. It can be
Yes.
anything. Okay.
Yes, except, and we're not going to talk about this with our natural students, right? But with our older students, we're going to discover, right, how many, I guess, could something be, now you've asked me this question, I've got to think through this.
But here,
I guess
how about this then,
n
Kirsty?
could be, you could have 1 degree. If something had 360 sides, then 1 degree. So yes, it could be anything. Although I don't think it could be, I think it would have to be a natural number, because you couldn't have a fractional side. So I couldn't rotate it. Well, no, if I had 720 sides, I could go half a degree. So I could have fractional degrees, but I don't think I could ever have real degrees. It would have to be fractional degrees. I don't think you would ever have like an irrational degree, just to be specific and clear.
But even this problem, like for all I know, I've changed it by now, right? This stuff's a year old, because we keep going through and cleaning them up. But if you look at it, if 180 degrees somehow relates to 2 and 120 relates to, do you guys want to guess? 3. The 90 might relate to
4,
right? And so you can actually, see if they can extend without having other problems. To me, that falls in the category of car school, when I'm always trying to just talk it through and get patterns of them.
Well, you guys, we had a lot of good conversation today. Are there any, I have not been, I know Lee keeps track of the chat. I have not.
Yeah,
Are there any questions that are lingering out there, or comments, things you guys would like to share, or questions you'd like to ask before we finish for today?
Yeah, I had a quick question. This year in our academic orientation, there were some really great videos that helped show examples of conversations in class by strand. And I was wondering if you guys had it in the works to do some similar type of videos with the math map of watching families maybe walk through a lesson and just ask good questions, just as an kind of give us a more demonstrative way of looking at what it would look
So-
like in our homes, or maybe even in the classroom for Challenge A?
So we don't really have, I can't say that we have any specific equipping for what that would look like at home. I would say to go back and look at our first round of the book club would be a great place to go, because we had some great conversations about the Exordia. So if you haven't seen those, that would be a great place to go and get some ideas for how you might discuss the cover, the artwork, and the quotations that are on the cover. That's a great place for that. The Challenge A tutors are going to have weekly equipping. They're going to have more than just weekly, but they're going to have some sort of academic orientation equipping, and then there's going to be weekly equipping that's going to step the Challenge A tutors through like each week in class. And it's going to be a very clear outline. Lee put together a really clear outline. Our tutors this year loved it, having this outline to step through to guide their class. And then the equipping actually goes through that and gives you some very clear guidelines as to what your seminar time can look like. And you're going to be, feedback has been great that you feel really well equipped for that. And then between that, for families at home, we're working on some just some basic resources for our foundations families, our essentials families, and then again, the tutors are going to be the best resource for those Challenge A families at home to help figure out what that looks like. And we're going to be honest with you that it's going to take a little bit of wrestling those first few weeks to figure out what this looks like in your home, because the math map, remember, has been designed to have the maximum tailorability for your family. And there's so many different ways you can use that. And so once the companion is available to everybody, you're going to find some suggestions in there. And then your tutors are going to be able to help guide you also. But every family is going to look a little bit different. So that's why it's a little bit harder than to say, well, here's this. There's going to be resources, but then it's going to just take you some time to kind of wrestle through what that looks like in each home.
So I had a question come up from a military family, because in Texas we have no oversight. What does this look like for those states that have oversight or testing or things like that? Are y'all addressing that in the companion?
Not the companion. I just did a quick answer, but I'll do it again.
Okay.
So, there are very few states that have any kind of oversight that any of this would apply to, and our local leaders in those states tend to know how parents adapt any of the curriculum to those requirements. And so this is one of the reasons we're so adamantly against any kind of ESAs or government funding, because then you get oversight. So what we encourage families to do, no matter what your situation is, good or bad, free or not, is to always follow the Lord and use any state requirements as a way to share the gospel with whoever that state representative is, rather than trying to comply, because then you'll comply anyway. Yeah, use all those tensions as a way to share Christ. So meanwhile, we have lots of articles on how to write up transcripts and things, so there's always help for that.
All right. Well, we are at 2:00. Thank you everybody for being here. Next week, we will be starting 3D, the third dimension. So very exciting. And then our dimensions are going to go pretty quick. 2D is our biggest in terms of the number of lessons, our biggest dimension. So our dimensions are going to go fairly quickly now. as we work towards the end of the year. So thanks
Okay.
today, and I look forward to seeing you guys tomorrow. Not tomorrow, but next week.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much, everyone. Bye.